Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Montefiore Spotlight series. Thank you for joining us, and for what I know can be one of the most important and sometimes overwhelming topics families face, and that's understanding the financial side of aged care. When a loved one begins to consider residential aged care, or they need to consider residential aged care, there's often many questions, including how much will it cost, what government support is available, what happens to my pension or my assets, and how do we make the best decisions for both care and financial wellbeing. Our goal tonight is to demystify this complex process, explain some of the terminology, and provide some practical guidance to help you feel more informed and confident through this journey. I'm Rebecca Martin from Shift Happens, and I'll be facilitating the discussion tonight. I'm delighted to be joined by three experts who bring different perspectives to the aged care financial journey. Welcome Robert Ory, who is the CEO of Montefiore, Melinda Rubin, the Admissions Manager, Montefiore, and Michael Horan, who's the Principal at Clarity Aged Care, a specialist aged care financial advisors who work closely with families to create a plan to ease that logistical and emotional challenge of entering aged care. Interestingly, Michael's business was born out of their own experience of feeling overwhelmed and confused about the aged care process. So to start with, I'll be asking our panellists a series of questions to get to the heart of some of the issues and provide as much information as possible. But we want to make sure that we leave time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. So please post your questions in the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. And if you would like to, let us know which one of the panellists you'd like to respond, if applicable. So let's start at a high level. So for families to understand the costs, it's helpful to understand the framework that sits behind the costs in terms of government legislation and the Aged Care Act. So Robert, maybe you can help us by explaining how aged care fees are structured and whether the government contributes to any of these costs, and probably more importantly, whether there's any upcoming or recent government legislation that families should be aware of when they're planning for care costs.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Well, the big change really came on 1 November last year when the new Aged Care Act came into effect. And with it came some changes to the fees and charges payable by those entering residential aged care from that date. It's important to note that it doesn't apply to existing residents that entered prior to 1 November 2025. It really only applies to those entering after or on or after 1 November 2025. And those changes involved effectively asking those that can afford it to make a greater contribution towards their cost of care. And they were introduced primarily in response to concerns about the aged care sector's ongoing financial sustainability. It may surprise many of people listening today to know that more than 60% of residential aged care providers are currently operating with a loss. And that's just not financially sustainable going forward. So the government recognised that there is a limit to how much the government and taxpayer can fund, and that the responsibility to fund residential aged care needs to be shared fairly between the government and the care recipient. But most importantly, though, most of the fees and charges you can be asked to pay are subject to an income and asset assessment that's undertaken by Service Australia. So you won't be asked to make a co-contribution. You'll only be asked to make a co-contribution if you can actually afford it. So in terms of the individual fees and charges, and I know Michael will probably touch on these in a bit more detail later, but the first fee, which is really the only fee that isn't means tested, and that's the basic daily fee. Everybody pays that, and that's a contribution towards your non-clinical daily expenses such as your meals, cleaning and laundry. And it's set at 85% of the single age pension. So it's currently $66.80 per day. So that's your first fee that everybody pays. Next, you might be asked to pay a hotelling contribution. Now, the government pays a hotelling supplement to providers to top up that basic daily fee. But if you have sufficient means, you may be asked to pay either part or all of that hoteling supplement on your own. The maximum you can be asked to pay is $22.15. If you are eligible to pay the full hotel, sorry, I know this is a bit confusing, but I'll try to take it slowly. If you're able to pay, or if you're assessed to pay the full hoteling contribution, then you might also be eligible to pay what's called a non-clinical care contribution. And again, this will depend on the outcome of your means test. And this fee is currently capped at a maximum of around $107 per day. Now that sounds like a lot. I can appreciate that. But you have to have substantial income and assets to be able to reach that cap. And finally, if you have the financial means again, you will be asked to make a accommodation payment, which is a contribution towards your accommodation costs. Now, this is normally expressed as a room price, and the amount you'll be asked to pay is generally based on the location of the facility and the quality of the room and the general facility you'll be occupying. Providers do publish their room prices on the My Aged Care website. So if you want to have a look, you can go on My Aged Care and have a look at what those prices are. Now, you can pay this amount either by a lump sum, known as a refundable accommodation deposit, or a rental equivalent, known as a daily accommodation payment, or a combination of both. And the government does stipulate the methodology used to convert the lump sum into the rental equivalent. But if you pay it by a lump sum, it is refundable, and this is important, it is refundable upon your departure, less a retention, which is equivalent to 2% per annum, and which only applies for the first 5 years of your stay. They are the general fees and charges that you would normally expect to see when you come into residential aged care, although there is one extra or additional one, and that's called a higher everyday living fee. And it's previously was known as an extra or additional service fee, and that is if providers provide services and you access those services that are either additional to or superior in quality that requires to be provided under the Aged Care Act. Not all providers offer higher day living services, and both the type of services offered and the fees for accessing those services can vary greatly from provider to provider. And I think perhaps, Rebecca, a little bit later, I think we might touch on the higher everyday living fees that Montefiore offers and charges. But before I go back to Rebecca, just touching back on your comment about what the government does fund. The government does fund a significant amount in aged care. In addition to the hoteling supplement, if you are unable to pay the accommodation payment, for example, they do pay an accommodation supplement. It is just generally less than what you would normally get through somebody that's actually paying the full accommodation payment, but it is a contribution towards your accommodation. And more importantly, they do fund your clinical care costs. So that's through a care subsidy. And that is really based on an assessment of each individual's care needs. And it can, again, it ranges depending on those care needs, but to give you an idea, it's roughly around $200 to $300 per day that we receive on behalf of the residents that we are caring for. So that's my general summary. I know I've kind of raced through that, Rebecca, and there's probably going to be a lot of questions that pop up in the chat about it, but that's my quick initial intro to fees in residential aged care.
Well, I think you've given us a good starting point, because I think what you've highlighted is that the system is quite complex, and that families do start to hear a whole new language that they might not have otherwise heard before they started exploring aged care options. So there's lots of acronyms that you've actually articulated them very well, but there's lots of acronyms that people will face, and terms that we don't use every day. I know a simple word like a bond became a RAD, and that can either be paid by a DAP, a RAC, or a DAC. So what we might do is ask Michael to unpack some of that aged care financial terminology a little bit more, by sharing what you see as the most important financial concepts that families should understand before making decisions.
Yeah, 100%, Rebecca. It's really challenging. And just to add to it as well, using my personal experience, but also the experience of most of the people that come to speak to us, it's happening at a really difficult time in life. It's typically the children that are having to do this, the children of the people entering care. They've usually got young kids trying to work full time, and then, mum or dad's had a fall and they're in hospital, and the doctor says, we need this bed back in 3 days. So you try and learn this whole new language, which can make it really challenging. So Robert sort of covered off a lot of those key acronyms and terms. I think broadly they fall into two categories. One is, what do you pay for the room? So the actual room in the aged care facility, that is known as a RAD, refundable accommodation deposit. For all intents and purposes, it is a bond. You'll notice that because aged care is a federally government-run industry, and the government loves acronyms. Basically, everything in aged care is acronyms, but it is a bond. And as you said, that can be paid either as a lump sum RAD or a daily accommodation payment called the DAP, or a combination of the two. So that's sort of the first bucket, I guess, is what do you pay for the actual room? And then you go into the second part of care. And often we get people come to us say, I think I understand aged care. Either I pay this, or this. So yeah, you understand part of aged care, but not the whole amount, because you also then each month are going to get an invoice that will have 5 line items on it. And each of those 5 line items has their own acronym as well. There's that daily care fee, the higher everyday living fee or health, the daily accommodation payment if there is an interest. And then the last two, the hoteling supplement and the non-clinical care contribution, or HSF and NCCC, they fall into a category of what used to be called the Centrelink means tested fee. So how they work, and Robert sort of touched on it, is the government pays every aged care facility for every bed that is occupied every day in Australia, up to almost about $400. Then the government turns around to the residents entering care and say, based on your means, we want you to contribute for part of what we're paying on your behalf. So that's up to, roughly about $130. So we often will get people come to us say, oh, there's no point in looking at this, or this, because I won't get any help from the government. It's actually just not true. Everyone in Australia, we live in a fantastic country. Everyone gets help from the government, and the more you have, the more they're asking you to contribute back to them. But all residents that enter aged care do get subsidised by the government, and then it's a matter of how much you need to pay back to them at the end. So those are some of the acronyms, and I guess how we like to think about how you fund aged care. And just to wrap up on that point, what you decide to do, whether it be with the ongoing monthly costs or the room costs or whatever different options you have available, are going to change those different fees. And they're also going to change your pension entitlement as well. So that's really important, especially to a lot of old Australians. So whether you pay the lump sum, or if you sell a property, or if some of the kids help out, or whatever options you have available to you, all of those things are going to impact your fees, your government entitlements, and how much pension you'll receive.
So I think essentially what you're telling us is there's no, it's not a cookie cutter. Getting some tailored advice is essential.
Yeah.
Or you understand all of that. So
Yep.
Interestingly enough, understanding that terminology may be one thing, but the next challenge that families often face is navigating the admissions journey into residential aged care, which can also be challenging when you're worried about your loved one. Melinda, you help families through this process every day. Can you share with us what the aged care admissions process typically involves?
Thank you, Rebecca. Definitely, the aged care journey is overwhelming at times, and starting early and understanding more about the process can really make a huge difference to families. The first step is to reach out to our admissions team. I know you're going to share some details at the end of the webinar with our listeners. And our role is to guide families through the process, answer questions, and gather as much information as we can about their loved ones and their circumstances and care needs. So there's 3 important things that we will need before we can even look at an assessment for a potential admission. So it's we need a completed application form, we need your referral codes for My Aged Care, being for respite and permanent care, and a referral from either your GP or the hospital, depending on the situation at the time. And once we have all that information, we then set up our own face-to-face assessment with our clinical assessor here at Monty. And, this assessment can take place either on site, in a hospital environment or in the comfort of your own home. Really just depends on what's happening at the time.
Great. And how long does this process take? And can you tell us a bit about how families could best prepare for a smooth transition?
Well, to be honest, it's really difficult. Every situation is different. For some people, an admission can happen within a couple of weeks of making their first inquiry. For others, it may take several months. It really depends on individual circumstances and, of course, bed availability at the time of their call. It's also important to know that not every inquiry that we receive leads to an immediate admission. A lot of people talk to us on and off over the course of time. So even if you're not ready now and you're talking to us, we keep your information on file so we can keep coming back to it and adding more data and keep on top of things so we can, work through, when is going to be the best time. Making these decisions aren't easy, but giving yourself time to explore the options and being prepared in advance can make the whole journey a lot less stressful. Organize your paperwork, commence the ACAT process as soon as possible, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Our team is here to support you and your family, every step of the way.
I think that's really good advice to get in early, even if you're not actually
not ready. Yeah,
not ready, just to make sure. You mentioned some of the paperwork and ACAT. And I know one of the things that often surprises families, and it totally surprised me, is the amount of paperwork involved. And many people tell us that they just don't know where to start, and it all seems really endless and repetitive. Yes. Can you just walk us through some of the key assessments, some of the forms and permissions that families need when considering aged care, and maybe just touch on some of the common, mistakes that create delays and challenges for people?
Of course. So the ACAT is probably the most important step in this whole journey. Without the ACAT approval codes, your loved one is not eligible to access government-funded residential aged care services. If people listening have not already done so, I strongly encourage you to contact My Aged Care as early as possible to arrange an assessment. We often, see families leave this step until a crisis occurs, which obviously creates unnecessary stress and delays in the whole process. Besides the ACAT, there are a few other key documents that are worth preparing for, in advance. Having your means assessment documentation updated, enduring power of attorney or guardianship documents, and an advanced care directive. Having these ready can save a lot of time and pressure later on. Some of the challenges that we talked about is leaving the ACAT and having that assessment done too late, incomplete paperwork, and legal documents not being in place at the time when decisions need to be made. A little preparation up front can make the process much smoother for everyone involved down the track.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that, because I think making sure that you have all that paperwork in place can speed up that process. Yes. So once the families understand the process and they've got their paperwork in place, their attention will naturally turn to really understanding the services that were outlined before. I think, Michael, you said there's like 5 lines on any invoice. Understanding what services are available and how those choices can influence them. Robert, I think you mentioned earlier, there's a fee called the Higher Everyday Living Fee, which is an optional voluntary fee for residents who choose to pay for and receive a high level of services. Could you explain the impact a higher everyday living fee can have on overall costs, and then more importantly, touch on some of the additional services that Montefiore provides through its model?
Sure, Rebecca. Well, look, the impact, the cost really depends on the level of services that the resident is accessing. There is, under the Aged Care Act, there are a set of services prescribed that a residential aged care provider has to provide under the Act. We have always been of the view that that really sets a minimum standard for services. And if you really want to provide quality of life to older people and really enhance their life, you've got to provide services far greater than what the minimum is that's prescribed under the Act. So Montefiore, we have always offered extensive services that are either additional to or superior to what is provided under the Act. And they currently include things like our enhanced food and dining experience, where we've got extensive menus and choice that is far greater than what's required under the Act. We've got unparalleled clinical and allied health services. We have nurse practitioners and clinical nurse specialists on staff, as well as 120 allied health professionals, including physiotherapy, occupational therapy, social work, all really to enhance the quality of life of people, to make sure they can maintain, for example, their mobility through physiotherapy. We have dedicated wellness centres and hydrotherapy pools at our Randwick and Hunters Hill campuses, and our Wallara campus can access those services as well. And we have expanded leisure and lifestyle, including creative therapy such as art, music, and dance therapy. We believe that people should participate in meaningful activity. As you can appreciate, all of that comes at significant cost to the organisation. And so for those residents that are accessing those services and who can afford to, we do ask them to pay what's called a higher everyday living fee, which is a contribution towards that cost that we are incurring. But we feel so strongly as an organisation that those services are really important to the quality of life of people, that if a person can't afford those services, we still provide it, but it's effectively subsidised by our foundation. So that's really our charitable and benevolent part, because we just feel so strongly about those services being important to people.
I agree with you that older people deserve to receive access to those services. So that's great that the Charitable Foundation does that and helps more people access it, which is so good. Families often are considering different types of care before they're making a permanent decision. And one option that people often explore is respite care. Melinda, could you explain to us the key differences between respite care and permanent residential care, and when might each option be most appropriate?
Of course, thanks, Beck. So respite care is short-term stay, and we see it can be incredibly valuable when people are trying to make a decision about whether moving into aged care is, for them for a permanent residency. It can be used to give a primary carer a break. Someone could be recovering from a hospital stay, or, as I said, families want to experience residential care before making, that longer term commitment. We often say to people, it's, an opportunity to test the waters, try before you buy, to see if it's going to, work for them and their family. It allows residents to become familiar with the environment, build their confidence and experience what living in aged care is like before making any of those longer term commitments. Permanent care is different. It's a long-term living arrangement and generally appropriate for a person when their care needs have reached a point where living at home is becoming more difficult. We understand this can be a very emotional decision, not only for the resident but for their families as well. Leaving the family home is one of the biggest life changes a person can face, and it's important to remember that this transition doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey, and our team is here to provide the guidance and support throughout that journey.
Right, and you're talking about that, and can you give us an idea about the financial modelling around each of those options?
So as Robert and Michael sort of touched on, and Michael will be talking more about this, respite care is generally government subsidised, but it does involve a daily out-of-pocket contribution, and those fees vary depending on your admission location, whether it's Randwick, Hunters Hill or Wallara. We generally at Monty, we have a 2-week minimum respite period, and all the way up to 9 weeks. The government provides up to 63 days of subsidised respite care in a financial year. Some families use respite more than once throughout the year. It's not just come in and do 2 or 3 weeks and they, it might help them when there's family members going away, someone's traveling, a carer's away. So it's a great way to, use blocks of time throughout the year if that helps the family. And of course, it's giving them a chance to experience before making that decision about going permanent. Obviously, when you move to permanent care, the financial considerations are very different because you've got your accommodation payments, your daily care fees, and your means tested contributions. So Michael has already spoken, is going to talk you through some of those in more detail, because that can be sort of, much more complex decision for people.
Great, thank you. So one of the family's largest financial decisions they'll make is the accommodation payment, and this is where many people seek professional advice to help with their decision making. Because when entering aged care, there's the refundable accommodation deposit that's required that we've talked about. So, Michael, can you tell us a bit about that and share the factors that families should consider when deciding how to structure or negotiate a refundable accommodation deposit, and maybe touch on some of the common options available?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely will. I just want to do one last point on that respite question you just asked. One thing that I find interesting and helpful to understand, it's not called a respite for the resident, it's respite for the person caring for the resident. That's why it's called respite. And to Melinda's point about the multiple tries, everyone is given 63 days per financial year. It's typically designed for multiple 2 or 3 week stints. So maybe mum is looking after dad and mum needs a break. It's often that other parent that's caring that gets neglected a little bit. Dad comes in for 2 or 3 weeks, gives mums a break, comes back home, and you repeat that process a few months from now. And on the financial side of things, we say respite is the most beautiful word in the world of aged care. It essentially means try before you buy. It's relative to permanent care. It's very cheap and very easy. All the complexity comes in once you start thinking about permanent care, which is typically around the RAD, to your other question, around that bond. One of the things I think trips up a lot of people is they'll go and do a tour of a facility and they might see these really large, intimidating numbers, for example, $1 million, and they'll see that for the room and think, well, I don't have $1 million in the bank, so I can't afford aged care for mum or dad. And it's just not the case. You can use any of those 3 options to your advantage and you can change at any time. So I think the easiest way that I like to explain this, everyone's circumstance is different, but probably the most common one we see is usually it's one parent that's around, another one might have passed away, and they're living in a home that they now own. And you'd go into care and let's say it's all very confusing. It's really overwhelming. We're just going to go in and for the first month, we'll just pay the interest. We're not going to put any lump sum down. Then a month later, we'll speak to me, a financial advisor, an accountant, whoever it may be. We'll liquidate, say, 200,000 that might be in savings, term deposit, super somewhere. Then we'll give that to Monty. And then we'll put the home on the market. That takes 6 months to sell. And when we have the money for that, we'll pay the rest of the bond. So that's one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is you can pay in installments over time. You don't need to have that full lump sum straight away. However, the other side of that coin is when circumstances do change, for example, the biggest one being selling the home, it's going to drastically impact your means tested fees that you pay to the government. And it's also going to change your pension entitlements. So those are some of the big things to consider when deciding how to pay a bond. As you can imagine, we get calls all the time saying, hey, can you tell me how I should pay this bond or if I should pay it or not? And unfortunately, the answer is just not that straightforward. Everyone's circumstance is different and it really depends what you have to ultimately calculate the best way to fund it.
And are there any suggestions you have for what families should be thinking about when they're weighing up those choices?
Yeah, well, the biggest one is to get a plan in place early. Most people come to us and they're sort of scrambling, which is totally understandable. Nobody, I think, one of the things I've realized recently is everyone wants to plan for retirement because that's a goal that people have. Nobody wants to plan for aged care because it's not a goal and nobody chooses to go into aged care. It's less of a choice and more of a necessity. So typically when you're making these decisions, you're not making them with the best headspace. And in a lot of cases, you don't even know what mum and dad have. This is the first time you're ever actually sitting down and say, where are their accounts? Who are they held with, etc. So understanding just what they have to start with is probably the biggest tip. And then seeing someone to get a financial plan in place to understand how each of your options that you have available, and everyone does have options. One of the big things we say to people, again, I've repeated this before, but we live in a great country that nobody's denied an aged care bed and nobody's ever kicked out of an aged care bed because they can't afford their bills. The less you have, the more the government starts to step in. So understanding each of your different options and at what point additional government support is available is really important to just make the whole process less overwhelming and provide a bit of clarity on what your different options are and what it's going to cost you.
Great, thank you. You mentioned before about impact on pension. So could you just talk a little bit more about how moving into residential aged care can affect age pension entitlements and what strategies can help some families navigate these changes the most effectively?
Yeah, 100%. Just while I remember it, sorry, on the previous question about the strategies, another strategy we often use that a lot of people don't realize, you can put money down towards the bond. For example, liquidate everything you've got and give $1 million to Monty. And then you can turn around and say, well, I can't afford my bills every month because I've given you everything I've got. So you can start getting some of those expenses taken off the $1 million. You can actually draw down against that amount as well, which is not something that's ever advertised. So most people don't realize that. On the pension point, we'll often get people come to us say, oh, don't worry about a pension. Mum and dad are self-funded. They don't qualify. Good news is the money you pay towards the bond, the RAD, is excluded for pension purposes. So if mum and dad are going in and you're liquidating, basically everything they've got and giving it to the facility, all of a sudden they're going to qualify for a pretty significant pension. On top of that, when living at home, a couple is eligible for a couple's pension. Round figures, that's worth about $45,000 or so. When one member of a couple enters care, or if both enter care together, you become eligible for 2 singles pensions, which is about $30,000 per person or about $60,000 in total. So some of the best news we get to deliver is to tell people, actually, you were never receiving a pension before, but if you do this, this, and this, you're going to get $60,000 a year from the government, which can help cover a lot of your aged care fees.
That is very insightful, I would imagine, for a lot of people, Michael, because a lot of people would not know that.
Yeah.
So when you look at all of these moving parts together, so we've got the fees, we've got the accommodation deposit, we've got pension, we've got assets, it really becomes clear why planning is so important. What role do you see, Michael, that financial modelling plays in aged care? You sort of touched a bit on this already in terms of the different outcomes that can happen. How can families assess the affordability of that upfront and ongoing cost? Best way to do that?
I'll give you a little anecdote to answer for you. We started this service because of what my father went through with his late mother, my grandmother. He's worked in finance for 20 years, and before that, he was a lawyer for 20 years. So he's got experience, and when he was going through this, he could not understand a thing that was going on. And I always say that to people to say, don't feel bad. There's no level of experience you can have to try and understand this system. What the financial modelling aims to achieve, we say to people, it's never our job to make a decision for you. We're never going to tell you what to do. We're going to present you with 3 or 4 options available to you and show you the outcomes of each of them, what the pros and cons are. And ultimately, it's up to the family to decide which one's best. For example, and we see this sort of an even split either way, we might say, all right, actually, if you sell mum's home, it's going to save you $20,000 a year. But as a family, the home has a lot of sentimental value. Maybe you've promised it to a grandkid or whatever it is. And at least okay, for $20,000 a year, that's worth it. I'll keep the home. If that figure is $100,000 a year, maybe you can't afford it then. So we need to see what that figure is and ultimately understand in each of these options, what are your outflows? What are you going to have to pay? What do you have coming in either from investments or the government? And then ultimately, what is your deficit or your surplus at the end? And what's left over at the end of the day? What are mum and dad's assets at the moment? And what's going to be left to the estate at the end? So the family can really make an informed decision. I will say as well, one thing we're seeing more and more, typically this process, I don't know who's on the call listening tonight, but typically this process falls to one child in the family. There's usually one person doing it all. And often they want the backing of an independent report so that when brother, sister, auntie, cousin, whoever in 6 months comes to them and says, hey, why did you sell mum and dad's house? They can actually produce this report and say, well, if we didn't, it would have cost X, Y, Z. So that's sort of, I think, the role that we play here. And yeah, whether it's us or someone else, our biggest advice is just get prepared early and understand what your different options are so that you can make an informed decision.
And you just touched on a bit about, the family assets. Are there any other tips that you've got about how these aged care decisions could be integrated with the broader estate planning and investment strategies to support the longer term financial?
Yeah, look, absolutely. It's difficult to give any individual tips because every circumstance is so different. But I think a few of the overriding things we see, I touched on it earlier, this is often the first opportunity the whole family's got to sit together to understand what mum and dad have and where it is. And I was going to say you'd be amazed, but maybe you wouldn't be, how many times there's just money everywhere and just in various different accounts. So it's a really good opportunity to consolidate it all and actually start that estate planning process, which a lot of people don't. Know who the accountant is, know who their financial planner is, their lawyer, where their will is, all that sort of stuff. The other thing to consider is, just in the most basic example, if mum and dad has a house and there's 3 kids, it's a lot easier to split a lump sum of $1 million 3 ways than it is to split a property 3 ways. So it's very possible that, when mum and dad were to pass, they were going to sell the home anyway. So doing it a couple of years early is actually just getting a head start on that process. So often people use this process as a bit of a de facto form of estate planning as well, to just start to understand where everything is and really simplify it for when the time comes.
I think that's sort of linked to what Melinda was saying earlier about making sure you've got all the wills and the enduring power of attorneys in order, all that legal side of it in order as you start this process. I'd like to just touch briefly on a situation that many families encounter as they transition from receiving, say, support at home with a home care package into residential care. So, Robert, could you talk to us a little bit about what happens to someone who's got an existing home care package when they're transitioning into residential aged care, and what options might be available to them during that transition period?
Yeah, I appreciate that we're mainly talking about residential aged care, but it's probably worth just touching, like you said, a little bit on home care. We obviously have a home care division, Help at Home by Montefiore. A lot of residents we get coming into residential aged care do transition from home care. So we already have that kind of relationship with them. Probably worth just touching on, I mentioned when the new Aged Care Act came in the 1st of November, it brought changes to fees and charges and funding in residential aged care. Also brought changes into home care through the supported home program. And most notably, previously there used to be 4 funding packages in home care. Now there's 8. And they range roughly from the lowest level, I think level 1 is around about $10,000 per annum that you can get to help support your care needs at home. At the upper level, it's nearly $80,000 per annum that you can access. So there is substantial funds there. Firstly, but before we talk about what happens when you come to Resi Care, my first comment would be, if you're at home and you're looking for support, reach out and start that process sooner rather than later. It's much the same as what Melinda and Michael mentioned about residential aged care. The sooner you get onto the process, the better, because unfortunately there is an enormous wait list for people wanting a home care package. So, and just to put that into perspective, you can go through an assessment process and be assessed as being eligible for a package, but there could be, on average at the moment, I think there's up to 12 months wait until you actually get the funded package coming to you. So it can be a very, very long process. So get in early and get that funded package. But once you've got a package and you've been using it and you transition to residential aged care, if you come in as a respite person or into residential aged care, the home care package is kind of put on hold for you. So it doesn't cease once you come in on respite. But once you transition to permanent care, it does. So the government doesn't double dip. You're not entitled to getting subsidised from the government through Resi Care and subsidised through home care. So it does cease. And if you have any what's called unspent funds, so I just mentioned the funding packages. So if you are spending funds and there's funds left over when you come into residential aged care, those funds are refunded back to the government. So my advice there is that if you are on a home care package or a supported home program and you are planning on coming into residential aged care, might as well use up your funds before you come in to make the most of it, rather than have it refunded back to the government.
Right, that's very good advice, I think, for anyone who is currently using that home care package. Is it any different for someone who's living in a retirement village? Is that transition different?
No. If you're in a retirement village, you're entitled to receive home care or supported home packages into the village. And if then you come out of the village and you come into residential aged care, the same rules apply.
Right, great, thank you. I think that's vital information for anyone transitioning from either home care or retirement living. We've covered quite a bit of ground tonight, so for families who might be at the very beginning of their aged care journey, I'd probably like to finish with a final question to each of you before we go to some questions. So if you could give families, there's one piece of advice before they begin their aged care journey, what would it be and why? I've heard a lot about planning tonight, so I'm sure that's going to feature. But I might start with you, Michael. What piece of advice would you give our viewers tonight?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to steal Melinda and Robert's here, but it's just get a plan in place early. Reason being, we see two types of clients that come see us. One is I'm starting to notice mum and dad going downhill. I really want to start planning for them now for what's going to happen. Or I'm in hospital right now. I'm panicking. I need help tomorrow. And it's much easier to deal. Again, speaking from experience, we were that second type of client. It's much easier to deal with people in that first situation because you can make decisions and have discussions with a clear head so that when the time comes, you know what it's going to look like. And that includes getting the assessment, looking at different facilities, and then understanding financially how you're going to pay for it all. But certainly much easier, even though no one wants to start thinking about that early rather than when it's panic stations.
Right, thank you. And Robert, some advice from you?
From me, okay, well, I know everybody's going to highlight start the process as early as possible, so I won't say that. I'll give some advice just around residential aged care. We are extremely proud of what we do at Montefiore in terms of providing care and services. But I would recommend that, if you're looking at placing somebody you love or for yourself personally in residential aged care, go and have a good look around. Come to Monty by all means and have a look, but have a really good look at other facilities and don't be misled or sidetracked just by the built fabric that you're going to have a look. In other words, the building that you're going into, because whilst it's important to have nice accommodation and all of that, the most important thing is the care you actually receive. And when you go into a facility, you can generally get a good feel for that by how the residents and the staff members react to each other, what they look like, how well kept the residents are. You can just get a feel for it when you go in. So I would highly recommend that go and have a look at other places and go with your gut in terms of what you think is a place that feels like it's got the right care and service delivery that you're after or your loved one would benefit from. And like I said, by all means, come and have a look at us.
I think you were talking earlier about when we were talking about the higher everyday living fee, about all the extra services that you provide in terms of the extended menus and things like that. So I think that would be good advice to get insights from other places as well as to what they do in those areas. Melinda, some advice from you.
All of the above. Everything Robert and Michael said, 100%. It's location, location, location. It's be prepared, be prepared, be prepared, and go, and exactly what Robert said, go and have a look. We have people who think, oh, I only want to be in the east, but they've never been to look at Hunters Hill and think that, oh, it's too far away, I can't go there. But Hunters Hill has the most beautiful grounds, and it could be something that your loved one is interested in, wants to sit outside in the sun all day. So definitely go and have a look. Have a look at ours and have a look at other places and make a decision based on comparing those two rather than just thinking this is the only place I can go to. I have no other choices, because there are choices. But be prepared. That's my biggest thing.
I think that's a resounding one from all of you about the planning and being prepared. Thank you very much. We've got quite a number of questions here, so just going to have a quick look here. We've got one here. What if you're an NDIS participant? Do you still need ACAT? You can take that.
I think the answer would be, it depends on the age, but yes, you still need to have an ACAT assessment. There's been some changes around the NDIS, and I'm not too sure, Robert, whether you have more information about that.
No, it's not
No.
really.
Yeah, so I think it really depends, Rebecca. We'd need to sort of do some investigating on an individual basis. Happy for that family to reach out to us and we can investigate for them.
Great.
Generally, the answer on that is yes. The government likes to try and keep aged care and NDIS as separate as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
I think that's true, though. There might be quite a number of questions here that each situation is individual. So we'll just go through these and just see if that's the case or if there is an answer that we can give. One of the first questions is, what is the accommodation amount daily? I think that was
at Monty we're talking about.
The question just asks, what's the accommodation amount daily?
Well, all I can say is that the RAD that we spoke about, so the lump sum amount we spoke about, ranges quite significantly within our organisation. I think, Melinda, I think it starts at about $550,000 for a low care room, standard room at Hunters Hill, to about 1.65 for a large suite with a separate bedroom and separate living area at Randwick, and basically everything in between.
Yeah.
If you were to pay that as a daily amount, the government applies an interest rate that is the calculator of that, and it's about, I think it's currently around about 8%.
It's going up, Robert. Yes, on the 1st of July, 8.43. So if you were looking at the suite in Randwick, for example, and you didn't put down the RAD, over and above the fees that are charged, and not including the means tested fees, you're looking at about $381 a day in interest.
Yeah.
On
I just looked at, I just did a quick calculation on, if you looked at 750,000, which is not an uncommon RAD to be paid.
Yeah,
it's about 165 a day for the accommodation payment part of it.
Which is still in addition to the fees and the higher everyday living fee, any means tested fees. Yeah.
The other thing just to mention, which we haven't really touched on, is that when you pay a co-contribution, so if you pay the hotelling contribution or the non-clinical care contribution, all of those are subject to a lifetime cap.
Correct.
So I think it's around about $135,000, or I think it's 4 years. So, Michael, you probably can confirm that, but I think it's if you pay a co-contribution, you pay for a maximum of 4 years, or if you reach a cap of 135, and then it drops off.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's 137 at the moment. Is that right, Michael? You agree?
Yeah, 137 for the non-clinical care. The hoteling doesn't have a cap.
It doesn't have the cap. Yeah, okay.
So after about 3.5 years, you would have reached your cap. So those higher fees will drop off after that point.
I'm starting to see why you need someone like Michael.
Exactly.
There's another question here. If you paid a RAD and run short of cash, I think you touched on this before, Michael, and draw down against the RAD, do you start paying that?
Yeah, you
Someone's
do.
got the lingo going there. That's great.
Yeah, that's an impressive question. That means I hopefully did a decent job in explaining that. You do. So there's two implications of drawing down against the RAD. One is obviously you get less back at the end from the estate, and the other is that you start being charged a DAP as well. So it's sort of a backup plan if you don't have the funds to pay the ongoing fees. The way I like to tell people is, let's say, using again round figures, you give Monty $1 million, it's still your $1 million. Monty's just holding it on your behalf until you get it back, but it's still yours, and therefore you can draw down against it.
Yeah. You can, just interestingly enough, you can also draw that DAP amount off the balance that's left over. So in other words, if you are the cash poor, so you can't fund that, you can actually accrue that fee as well.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that answers the question for Brent. The next question, or someone would like you to comment on this. My parents both went into care at the same time They wouldn't fill in the assets paperwork for Services Australia. They had to pay the maximum means tested care fee plus the daily fee, which was $650 a day for both. They've both reached the lifetime cap now, which you've all just talked about. I heard you say that everyone gets help from the government. Also, they are both self-funded retirees. Can you comment on this, please?
I can comment on this, and I'm going to add extra confusion. So as Robert mentioned, the rules changed on November 1st. The old system used to be called means tested fee. The new one's called the non-clinical care contribution. There are some people that are a little bit caught in the middle. When the new rules came in, I think the exact date was September 12th, 2024 is when they were proposed. If you were already receiving home care, so you were in the aged care system on that date, the government sort of locked you into that old system. If you were after that date, you're in the new system. So this question is about the old means tested fee, and the cap there was closer to around that $320 or so, which is where you've got the $650 a day. And then once you've hit that lifetime cap, Monty's still receive the money from the government. You just don't have to pay it back to them. So you still are getting extra help, but I don't want to go too deeply into that question because the system has just totally changed since then.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. There's a question from Melissa. Can you please clarify respite charges? So
respite charges, you are paying the daily care fee, which is the $66.80. And in Montefiore's case, we have our higher everyday living fee. So in Randwick, our higher everyday living fee is $106 a day, and in Hunters Hill, it's $74 a day. So that's still the out-of-pocket cost during respite.
There's another question here sort of relating to this with the health fee that asks, does every resident at Monty pay this? Which I think the answer is probably no. And how is the amount assessed per resident?
So not everybody pays it. So we do support concessional residents at our Hunters Hill facility, and those residents, based on the fact that they are fully supported by the government, so they are not required to pay the additional service fee. However, those that do have the means, we are a full service facility, and we do the additional service fee, or now known as health, does apply.
Can I just touch on that and preempting one of the further questions down that I can see as well? Melinda just mentioned a supported resident. So there's a term in the world of aged care, supported, not just using that word, it's an actual term, which is essentially someone that has less than about 200,000 to their name. So one of the questions I can see further down is, if you don't have the money for the bond, can you afford to go into care? If you're a supported resident, all facilities must legally keep a certain percentage of beds aside for supported residents. So there are certain criteria and categories that you can definitely get a room in a facility without having that money. But also to answer that question too, you certainly don't need to have that full amount. You'd be amazed how far we can stretch people's money. For example, if you just had 500,000 out of $1 million, that can last you a really long time, and realistically probably longer than the resident has in aged care, by putting a little bit down, getting some of the expenses taken off, getting more from the government for the pension, things like that. So it's one of the common misconceptions we get is, the room's $1 million, I don't have $1 million, I can't afford care. And it's just not the truth.
Right. There is a question here that asks, are there specialists for planning this journey? Michael is with us tonight. Contact Clarity Aged Care to get that plan started. There's a question here regarding ACAT codes. So my mother recently had an ACAT assessment, was told that their new rule is that they are only allowed to give the respite code. The person insisted they couldn't give a permanent code. How does a person transition then from respite to permanent care?
So if someone was with us on respite and the plan was for them to move into permanent care, we can then request for a reassessment while they're in care. So that sort of can, smoothly happen. And while waiting for that assessment, they would remain on respite while waiting to be reassessed. And hopefully the government, doesn't leave it too long to reassess a resident. Otherwise, they will remain on respite for that period of time.
Thank you. Another question here from Rosemary: is the full amount of the RAD returned?
So yeah. Michael, you go.
Happy to. So one of the new rules that came in after November 1st is what's called a retention amount. The facility retains 2% of the RAD per year, up to a maximum of 10% over 5 years. So to put some dollar figures around that, if it's $1 million bond that you're paying, the facility keeps 2%, which is 20,000 a year. The maximum they can keep is about 100,000. So you'll get back out of $1 million, at the very minimum, you'll get back 900,000.
Right, thank you. Could you please clarify, can you use supported home for respite care?
No, two different worlds, home care and aged care.
Yeah.
Great. I think that's most of it. There was a couple of questions around the recording being available. So everyone who is registered will get a copy of this recording for sure. And I'm just checking to see. Oh, there is a couple of other questions. They're coming thick and fast now, and we've got some time. Could you please run through the 5 line items on your bill again, Michael?
Yeah, sure. No problem. In order from least to most complicated, it starts with the basic daily care fee, $66.80. Everyone in Australia pays that, non-negotiable, rich or poor, that's getting paid anywhere. The second is the higher everyday living fee, which vary by facility. So whichever facility you look at, they'll have a different one. The third is the interest on the unpaid RAD. So that's the daily accommodation payment. And then the last two we lump together as means tested fees. That's called a hoteling supplement and a non-clinical care contribution. That's the summary of those 5 line items.
Great, thank you. Hopefully, Jude, that's given you some better detail around that. One last question here. If a couple own their retirement home and have $1 million in assets, if one couple wants to move to Monty, how would the remaining person manage financially?
It's a really good question. I'm happy. Robert, do you want to answer that? I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, if it's with us, or if it's in our retirement village, because we operate both the retirement village and the residential aged care, we can access the equity that's in the apartment to assist with funding the residential aged care component. So in other words, for the couple, one can stay in the apartment, the other can come into residential aged care, and they don't necessarily have to find any more money for that. We can actually access the equity that's sitting in their apartment.
I'll make just one more point on that, and I promise I'm independent. I'm not associated with Monty, and they haven't paid me to say this, but we often get people come to us who are looking for retirement villages. It's not our area of expertise, so we don't comment on it. But the one thing we do say is if you are looking to go to retirement, you're much better off going to one where they have aged care on site for exactly that reason. That process that you just mentioned there, Richard, is a lot more complicated if the aged care and the retirement village are 2 separate companies. If they're a lot of, or not a lot, but there are some such as Monty that have both retirement and aged care on the same side, and it becomes a lot easier.
Okay, thank you. And we do have time maybe for one more question. My mother is presently living independently with a supported home level 3 package, but I would like her to go into respite while I'm away for 5 weeks. How do I get a respite code?
You need to call My Aged Care and request an assessment and do your best to, let them know how urgent it is, because unfortunately the wait time at the moment is quite lengthy. The only other way to come in is as an unfunded resident, and you'd be looking at, up to $600-700 a day without those codes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one last one. When did the new RAD rules come into force?
November 1st last year, 2025.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, that wraps up. We've got lots of very interesting questions. That wraps up most of the questions. Thank you very much, Robert, Melinda, and Michael, for sharing your expertise and the practical insights that you've given and guidance that you've given this evening. As I mentioned before, we will be sending out more information, the admissions email address and contact details, so that you can contact admissions at Monty if you would like to ask any more questions. And we'll be sending some resources to everyone who is registered with a copy of tonight's recording. If there's one theme I think that has come through tonight very strongly, it is the value of starting early, of asking questions, seeking advice. As Melinda rightly pointed out, get on their list, early and plan before those decisions do become urgent. And I hope tonight's discussion has helped make the aged care financial journey feel a bit clearer. I think there's still a lot in it, which is why Clarity Aged Care exists. Hopefully it's made it a lot clearer for you and a lot less daunting. Yeah, and on behalf of Montefiore, thank you all very much for joining us. Have a great evening.
Thanks,
guys.
Thank you. Thank you.